What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another edition of Pistons Daily, where you can find daily content covering all things Detroit Pistons, Monday through Friday. As always, I am your host. My name is Kyle Garrison. I'm over on Twitter at Kyle Garrison2, where I talk all things Detroit sports. So head over there, give me comments, questions, concerns, episode ideas. I'd love to hear from all you guys. Also, if you could subscribe, leave a comment, leave a like. Also, head over to Spotify, leave a 5-star review and a follow. I would greatly appreciate it. And with that being said, let's jump right into today's video. So I know yesterday I touched on 3 different underrated skills that I like on this Pistons roster currently. And I figured as we kind of get in the dog days of the summer, the offseason kind of winds down, we start getting closer and closer to training camp, I just want to touch on a different underrated skill on this Pistons team every day. So today I wanted to touch on Cade Cunningham's overall rim protection. And first thing that I wanted to point out is the fact that obviously he is a much more impactful player on the offensive end. Last year, when you're watching him play and you're watching the Pistons play, you notice him more on the offensive end. And he ended up with 3.0 offensive win shares last year and coming in at 2.9 defensive win shares last year. So Cade Cunningham is not only an elite offensive player, he affects the game on the defensive end in multitude of ways. I know his ability or his agility and his lateral quickness and his perimeter defense sometimes is a little bit questionable as a 6'8 guard, but overall, when you're just looking at his impact on the defensive end of the floor, he had 113.4 defensive rating last year, which ranked 14th amongst guards. And I think a lot of that had to do with his rim protecting ability, but he does bring some perimeter defending to the table, and his off-ball defense is very solid as well. But I don't want to touch on that. I wanted to talk about his rim protection because that is an area where you don't need to look at the advanced stats to realize how impactful he is. You can just simply watch a game and see. There was times last year where he was just unbelievable at protecting the rim for a 6'7 guard. And when you look at his stats overall, 4th in the league in blocks per game behind Keon Ellis, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Derek White. And then coming in at 4 is Cade Cunningham. And he had more blocks per game than guys like Dyson Daniels, Anthony Edwards, and Jalen Williams, who are all considered quote-unquote better athletes than Cade Cunningham. But there's a couple of reasons why I think Cade is able to protect the rim at a high level. One, he is a very underrated athlete. I think he is just as good of an athlete as a guy like Dyson Daniels or a guy like Derek White. I think he's probably more athletic than a guy like Derek White. So he brings some athleticism to the table that because he plays a very slow-paced style of basketball, there's some people that like to look at it as, oh, well, he's not explosive, but that's how he chooses to play. He likes that style of offense. That doesn't mean that he's the same way on the defensive end, and clearly we saw that throughout this last year because guys like Dyson Daniels and Jalen Williams are considered to be 2 of the best defensive guards in the entire NBA, and Cade was a better statistical rim protector than both of them last year. So there's a couple of reasons why I think Cade has kind of figured out that he can be an elite rim protector at the guard position. One, the timing on his jumps is much improved from his rookie year. You can see he's much more comfortable. He knows when to slide over on help defense, and he knows when to stay straight up and down when a defender is making an aggressive drive. That's another point, is he's very good at staying solid, staying strong, staying up and down, and not drawing fouls. Sometimes he was a little bit susceptible to fouling on drives, but that was more of the reach-ins, that was more of the swipe downs. When he doesn't do that, he's very effective because he has a 7-foot wingspan. He's 6'8", he has a 7-foot wingspan. So he's out there and he's got the body of a power forward with the quickness and the agility of a point guard. So there's just a lot to like about his, him as a defensive prospect. And especially as he's gotten older, we've really seen him kind of come into his own and see that defensive upside come to fruition. So I really like what we saw from Cade Cunningham last year on the defensive end, especially at the rim. And obviously there is some things that he has to work on. The perimeter defense just has to get better overall, but he is an elite guard rim protector, and I hope that he continues to hone in on that strength and realizes that that's where he can be successful on the defensive end. But moving on, I just talked about it. I will talk about different underrated skills throughout the rest of the offseason, but I just want to touch on Cade there before we move on. But speaking of players with underrated skills, I wanted to talk about the 2022 rookie extensions, and The Athletic released a just 2020 extension tier list. The article is titled NBA Rookie Contract Extensions Are Harder Now, or Why NBA Rookie Contract Extensions Are Harder Now to Get Done, and What to Expect with the 2022 class. So this was written by John Hollinger. I'll just read the tiers to you real quick and who falls under each one. So group one, the extensions that are already done: Paolo Banchero, Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren, and Jabari Smith. Group two, on deck with in quotations probably, Dyson Daniels, who we just mentioned, Jalen Duren for the Pistons, Keegan Murray for the Kings, Christian Brown for the Nuggets. And then we dive into group three. But first, before we dive into group three, I just want to touch on Jalen Duren and kind of the description underneath his reasoning behind being in the group T tier. And Hollinger writes, Duren has his shortcomings as a defender and decision maker, but he's a top 15 center in the league and is still on the way up. Board money sign values Duren at $25.3 million for the coming season, and he's still in his early 20s. Detroit has no major cap obstacles in its future and could even front load a deal for Duren to help manage its downstream cap better. Either way, a total similar to the one I proposed for Daniels, around 5 years and $125 million, seems like the right ballpark for a comparison point. Jared Allen signed for 5 years at $20 million a pop with Cleveland at a similar point in his development, and that was under the 2021 salary cap. Next year's cap projection is 32.1% higher. So when looking at Jalen Duren, he mentioned obviously Jared Allen, who I think is a pretty similar center just when it comes to skill set overall. Big, good rim protector, had some things to work on the defensive end, but it's kind of come into his own throughout his career. That's kind of where I see Jalen Duren landing. So that $25 to $28 million range makes a lot of sense, especially if he shows development in those other parts of his game that we kind of haven't seen over the past 2 years. So when we are kind of discussing just where he needs to improve, I would like to see just a more expanded involvement in the short roll game. I'd like to see him add an option where he can shoot a push shot or a mid-range jumper, like I've talked about in the past, because then that allows his passing and his getting to the rim and his efficient finishing ability to just be even more valuable if he opens up another part of his game where the defense has to hone in on his ability to shoot over the top. So that could be a big area where Jalen Duren adds some value and adds some more money to his contract. We already know JD can pass, he can finish at the rim, and he's an elite lob threat with excellent chemistry with your franchise player in Cade Cunningham. So clearly, the Pistons are very excited with the development of Jalen Duren, with the camaraderie he's built with Cade Cunningham. They were the best lob duo in the entire league last year, and I expect that to continue into this year, and I expect the Pistons to re-sign or extend Jalen Duren long term. But again, because we see Cade and Jalen Duren thrive in that pick and roll in a playoff setting, I'd imagine that, $25 to $30 million is on the table as an extension as of today. He doesn't even need to come out and play another season, and because we already have a big sample size. They played alongside each other all year long, and again, like I said, you have to evaluate how these young players fit alongside your franchise cornerstone in Cade Cunningham. And we've seen that Jalen Duren does, especially when you add Asar Thompson in the mix. It makes JD an even better defender. And there's just a lot to like about that duo right there between Cade and JD. So I do see him as a potential top 10 center in the future, especially by the end of his rookie extension is up. So I'd like to see the Pistons lock him down as soon as the trade deadline, or hopefully even sooner than the start of the season. But right now we don't know what's going on behind closed doors. We don't know what Trajan Langdon views Jalen Duren as going forward, and he might want to see another year of sample size to really become confident in giving Jalen Duren a $25 million to $30 million annual contract. But moving on, I know we talked about how he's in the tier 2, and I do believe the Pistons will extend him, so I think that this is fair to have him in the deals as good as done, essentially in that tier. And then looking at tier 3, the maybes. So this consists of Walker Kessler, Tari Eason, Shaden Sharp, Mark Williams, Benedict Mathurin, Nikola Jovic, and then your very own Jaden Ivy. So Hollinger writes, Jaden Ivy for the Pistons after a 24-25 season that was mostly lost to injury. I have a hard time seeing how the Pistons and Ivy could come to a resolution on a long-term number. The Pistons are under no long-term cap pressure and can afford to wait a year and gather more information, even if it costs them a bit if Ivy breaks out. There's also a fascinating cap nerds scenario where Detroit gives Ivy a 1-year balloon payment next summer to set itself up for either in-season trades or 2027 cap space. Meanwhile, Ivy likely has just as much incentive to push up the value of his next contract rather than settle for what likely to be a MLE-ish type of money on an extension. For what it's worth, boards, I don't know what this is. It's capital BORD with a money sign. This is on The Athletic. I know it's like their rating system of where they value players, but let me know in the comments what that means. But continuing on, boards only sees him as a $10 million value. And surely Ivy would frown at any figure in that range. So $10 million is ridiculous. He's not getting $10 million. If the Pistons throw him at that offer, I mean, for good reason, he should turn it down because he is much worth more than $10 million. And granted, yes, he did break his leg last year, and that was a big detriment to this team. But at the end of the day, he was still at a top 5 pick for good reason, and he was unbelievable in his 2 months before injury last year. In October and November, especially down the stretch, he was playing at such a high level, and I think that he can come back and be just as good, maybe a little bit worse, especially with the explosiveness. But as time goes on and he gets more comfortable in a live game setting once again, I think he's going to be back to where we saw him last year, and he's going to garner more than $10 million. I think that $20 million is where I'd see him at, especially if he has a very good comeback year this year and shows that he can be a long-term two next to Cade Cunningham. We talked about with Jalen Duren. One of the main reasons that they're going to extend him is if he can be a long-term fit next to their franchise superstar in Cade, and that's the same way with Jaden Ivy. If he can be the 2 guard next to him and he can shoot at a 40% clip and be a great off-ball guard like we know he can be, then he's going to garner about $20 million, and I don't see a reason why the Pistons would not extend him. But again, if he gets a full year and plays well into the playoffs, we could be talking about him in the same tier as Jalen Duren as a $25 million player. But obviously, there's just still a ton of question marks about what he looks like next to Cade in a larger sample size. So we're just going to have to see that next year. Hopefully, he can play close to 82 games, and we'll get a good feel of what the Cade, Cunningham, and Jaden Ivy backcourt looks like going forward. But moving on, I just wanted to touch on that article. I thought it was pretty interesting. I'm not going to even really touch on anybody in the group 4, don't hold your breath, because it does not apply to the Pistons whatsoever. So we are going to move on here and talk about where do the Pistons stack up against the rest of the Eastern Conference. So John Schumann over at NBA.com released his post-offseason Eastern Conference power rankings, and I just wanted to go through them real quick. So at number 1 is the Cavaliers, and then number 2, the Knicks, number 3, the Magic, number 4, the Pistons, number 5, the Hawks, 6, Bucks, 76ers, 7, Heat, 8. So I'll just read those top 8. I don't need to go all into the entire Eastern Conference, but I think 4 is very fair. I talked about them as 5 in my, pre-off-season predictions for where I see this team at. I had them at 5, and I think 4 is very fair as well. I could see them sitting around 4, 5, 6, even 3 at the end of the next season, and I would not be surprised. I think if they were top 2, I'd be surprised, and I think if they were in the play-in, I would be surprised. So I think a successful season is avoiding the play-in, winning a first-round matchup, and really just kind of showing the rest of the NBA that last year wasn't just a one-year wonder. This team is here to stay. And especially considering the fact that teams like Orlando and Atlanta, who are ahead of Orlando's ahead of the Pistons in this power rankings, and then Atlanta is one spot behind them. Neither of those two teams were ahead of the Pistons last year. The Pistons were ahead of both of them. So there's a lot of room for the Pistons to hop teams like the Pacers and the Celtics and the Bucks, who all had a little bit of downgrades this past offseason and should realistically take a little bit of a step back. So overall, it's just a very interesting conversation. And, we're going to need to see at least a month of sample size in the East to see where everyone shakes out. Because like I mentioned, the Magic, they made a big addition. The Hawks made like 6 big additions. The Bucks made a big addition, but then they lost some pieces as well. The Pacers lost some pieces. The 76ers are going to be healthy again. So there's going to be a ton of shakeup, and there's a lot of different things that could happen with injuries and whatnot. So it's all speculation at this point. But if you're just looking at paper and you're looking at how these teams stack up next to each other, I do think that the Pistons have a real shot of passing teams like Indiana, Milwaukee, and Boston. I didn't like where their off seasons went. I didn't love the Pistons offseason in itself either, but again, Malik Beasley kind of threw a wrench into things. Milwaukee and Indiana especially, just seemed like they were just trying to dump off Miles Turner's contract, and Milwaukee took advantage of that. But then again, Milwaukee had to buy out Damian Lillard, so now they're $22 million in debt over the next 8 years because they decided to split up Damian Lillard's buyout into multiple years instead of just doing the $45 million per year that he originally was owed. So there's just a lot going on in the Eastern Conference that could cause some shakeup, and the Pistons are in a very good spot. They're right in the middle of it. So right now, I would not be surprised if the Pistons ended as a 3-6 seed and won multiple playoff series, but I think that is kind of the expectation now. Last year with being the 6th seed and taking the Knicks to 6 games and potentially, you had a real shot to win that series. And on paper, they're one of the best rosters in the entire NBA. So you have an expectation now to compete. So being in the preseason power rankings at number 4 is very viable. That's where you should be. That's where you should want to be. You should want those expectations. And I think that this team is going to take that and run with it heading into this year. As we discuss the Pistons' rise in the East, I'll continue to dive deeper and deeper in how I think they stack up against these other teams, especially once the season gets started. But speaking of how they stack up against these other teams, another very similar topic that I wanted to touch on real quick is the Central Division overall, and if the Pistons can make a Central Division push. I won't talk about this too much because realistically, winning the division doesn't mean anything. There's a couple tiebreaker implications, but it's just pretty much for bragging rights among the 4 other teams in your division. So in the Central Division, the Pistons have not finished in the top 2, since 2008 when they came off 4 straight division titles. In fact, they have not finished in the top 3, or they've only finished in the top 3 times since 2008. And it's been ugly. They have gotten dominated by the Central Division. They've been the laughingstock of the Central Division. They've kind of interchanged with the Bulls, I would say, as the worst team, but the Bulls have had much better seasons since 2008 than the Pistons have. And when you look at the 2 teams that have really dominated them, the Bucks have finished 9 seasons in a row ahead of the Pistons in the Central Division standings. And the Pacers have finished 16 seasons in a row ahead of the Pistons. Yes, 16. And both of these teams, for the first time in what seems like forever, could most definitely finish behind Detroit. You look at Tyrese Halliburton. He's out for the year. They lose Miles Turner. He signs with the Bucks. Obviously, that helps the Bucks out, but they lose Damian Lillard to injury, then buyout. Then their franchise player is starting to get a little bit restless, and we don't really know what that looks like. He wants to win now. The franchise and the front office isn't really in a position to win now, so you have to look at that roster, and nothing is certain for them right now. So there's a real possibility that Detroit will be better than both the Bucks and the Pacers in 2025, and they could finish in the top 2 in the Central Division for the first time since 2008. When I was 6 years old. I was 6 years old in 2008. So, yeah, it's been a long time coming, and the fact that they're even competitive, we're even having this conversation, is very, very. It's just encouraging, and it's fun, and it's nice. I don't think that the Pistons are going to be able to have a better regular season than the Cavs after what they did last year in the regular season. They were just absolutely unbelievable. So I don't see that being the case, but to be able to pass the Bucks and the Pacers for the first time in 9 and 16 years, that's a big win in itself. They finished 4th last year because the Central Division was probably the top to bottom in the Eastern Conference, at least the best division. But again, some teams are going to take a little bit of a fall off, and I think the Pacers and the Bucks are candidates for that happening. And if they do, the Pistons will look to pounce and hopefully be a top 4 team and top 4 team in the East and a top 2 team in the Central Division. But let me know in the comments if you think the Pistons can finish in the top 2 of the Central Division for the first time since 2008, or if you think the Bucks are still going to be very competitive and very good, or a team like the Bulls or the Pacers kind of comes out of nowhere and finds their way in that top 2. But that's all I've got for you guys today. Let me know in the comments or over on Twitter your thoughts on Cade's improved ability to protect the rim, where you view the Pistons' progress on extending Duren and Ivy, and also if you think the Pistons can be a top 4 seed in the East this year and make a push to the Eastern Conference Finals. As always, like, subscribe, comment, turn on post notifications, and follow me on Twitter at Kyle Garrison 2. Also, go over to Spotify, leave a 5-star review and a follow if you can. I would greatly appreciate it. Once again, thank you all so much for tuning in every single day. With that being said, that is going to do it here for episode 39 of Pistons Daily, and I will catch you all next time.